You know, for this past month, I've been playing a lot of betas and new releases, and they got me thinking, what keeps a player going in a game? Like, when we make games, the core issue is whether players are going to keep playing them, right? So in a lot of ways, player motivation is at the core of a game's design. Now, one of the main ways that you can keep a player motivated is by giving them goals and rewards. So for example, early arcade games had a pretty simple way of doing this. They would use player score and high score leaderboards. A game like Pac-Man is a pretty simple affair. There's no story, there's no quest, there's very little sophistication. It's virtually 100% gameplay. Something that people would find fun for a few minutes only if they had the time to play the game for its own sake. Introducing a scoring system to the game has a dramatic effect on how players react to it. Although the score is just a number without too much meaning, it becomes important to the player. It's like a measure of their prowess. It's a concrete way to show that they're better than someone else at something, even if it is, just a video game. And psychologically, status symbols are pretty damn important. It helps us show others where we are in the social hierarchy. In fact, we form groups and hierarchies quite easily while in a society. Having your name up on a leaderboard gives you social standing. It places you in the pack of your peers, and competition fuels time and effort invested in getting better at a said game. For simple arcade games that test skills like reflexes, reaching higher game levels and putting bigger scores on the board are the closest thing to game progression these types of games have. But what about the infamous shooters? How do we get from the casual arcade FPS experiences of yore to modern online multiplayer shooters? I have some ideas that I'd like to share. You see, back in the day with early first-person shooters like Wolfenstein 3D, they stuck closely to the arcade formulas of high scores. While speedrunning has turned into a specialized section of gaming, it was the expected approach to this game. Every level had a par time that you were meant to beat, and at the same time you also got points for shooting Nazis and picking up treasure. But regardless of how you racked up the numbers, the game used points as a way to let you know how good you were at playing it. Now this arcadey scoring mechanic would be the hallmark of 90s shooters. Duke Nukem 3D and Doom both had similar mechanisms, as did their contemporaries. Now later with the arrival of narrative shooters like the first Half-Life, the concept of scoring doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You see, single player games can now give a player a sense of progression through alternative, rich, and subtle means. The story itself follows a series of climaxes until a final dramatic end. No one is timing you or tallying how many things you've picked up. Once the arcade shooter trend ended, however, the idea of a score you could compete against didn't make sense anymore. There was, however, one place in modern shooters where scores still meant something: multiplayer.
BFG spawn.
You guys probably remember back in the day, multiplayer shooters involved getting some friends together for a LAN party and just having a blast over the weekend shooting at each other. Deathmatches were the easiest way to see who was the top dog. If you got the most kills, you were the winner. Game modes such as Capture the Flag or Team Deathmatch were still easily quantifiable. Although you were now playing for your team, the scores were still very simple. But this is where I begin to think that things were starting to change in some interesting ways as soon as everyone isn't in it for themselves anymore. Now, when the team multiplayer first-person shooter game started to gain ground, the problems of keeping score took a leap of complexity. You see, in a simple shooter deathmatch, every player is symmetrical. They all have the same job, which is to shoot as many enemy players as possible. With a team deathmatch, it's more or less the same, except that everyone's score gets added together, which means you can see how much each player has contributed to the win or loss. Now, even here, it's important to note that scoring begins to get a little harder. What about players who helped set up kills through teamwork, but they didn't necessarily get the kill themselves? But in any case, it's a fuzzy thing to score at the best of times. Now, when games like the first Team Fortress saw the light of day, it became harder to figure out how to dole out progression indicators. Now the teams were asymmetrical. Players had different roles, different equipment. How do you know if the healer was pulling his or her weight? Is it any good? Today, developers have taken inspiration from wherever they can to craft scoring and progression systems for modern online shooters.
Dang it, he used it.
Bringing you back.
Blam, he's
Good
right.
hunt.
Yeah.
3 down.
This is-
Vader's dead. Keep pushing.
A game like Overwatch has been built from the ground up to reward players no matter how they contribute to the team's performance, which means not everyone has to shoot to kill in order to be rewarded in one way or another. The mechanics of RPGs have also insinuated themselves into shooters. More recently, I would argue that Destiny 2 Forsaken takes some of these mechanics and weaves a complex set of progressions, which clearly shows other players where you fit in the hierarchy of skill and commitment to the game. And in more simplified multiplayer shooters like Battlefield 5 and Black Ops 4, the scoring systems are designed to reward just about every little thing you do to help the war effort. Not everyone has to be a frontline grunt. And not to mention that you're working to unlock gear and other items in the game that also act as status symbols. Now, of course, the dark side of this comes in with monetary weaponization of these incentives and symbols. Loot drops and people paying hundreds of dollars for weapon skins are but two examples. But I believe as we progress and as AI become more sophisticated and computers become more and more powerful, we may start to see scoring systems become more nuanced than they have ever been before. Being able to grade a person on things like their intent and strategy, and evaluating levels of gameplay that are specific to each player, or even tracking complex interactions between players. Now, we have actually seen the birth of such a system already in existence, with Overwatch's Play of the Game system.
Play of the game.
Now, while of course everyone will definitely agree that this system still needs a lot of work, I would say that it is in fact the first multiplayer game in years to come up with such an innovative way to reward excellent mastery of the scoring system. And I'm very excited to see how this system could become the godfather of more complex and innovative scoring systems in the future. But for now, however, as we wait for the next leap in how we score players' performances on the battlefield, the pinnacle of abstract scoring is still a humble and pointless achievement. But you know, regardless, I think we all love scoring systems anyway, because let's be honest, dopamine is one hell of a drug.
Raider inbound. Primeval's dead.